Thanks for being here. Subscribe to Cheating Stories Best, so you don't miss new stories.
Is intimacy with an actor more valuable than fidelity to your husband? Today's story with a similar plot. Enjoy it! My wife Abby loved going to the movies. If I wanted to make her happy, all I had to do was take her to a good movie. I couldn't just take her to any movie, it had to be in one of 4 categories: animation, action, adventure, drama, or romance. Abby also went to almost any movie that was with Tom Torino, Matt Wright, or Brad Talbot. They were her favorite actors. My first date with Abby was when I took her to see Sleepless in Seattle. She didn't really like Tom Hanks, but she loved the story. Years after we got married, she admitted that she fell in love with me after that movie. Why she did this, I have no idea. After 12 years of marriage, Abby is still a very beautiful woman, standing at 5 feet 6 inches tall and weighing 115 pounds. She has a magnificent figure, and her dark emerald green eyes really stand out against her raven hair. When Abby gets dressed to go out, she still turns men's heads in her direction. My name is John Sawyer, and I'm no slouch either. I'm 6 feet 1 inch and 180 pounds. I have sandy hair and blue eyes. Abby and I have been told many times that we make a great couple. During college, before I met my future wife, I never lacked female companionship. However, when I met Abby, I realized that I didn't want anyone else. For 12 years, I thought Abby felt the same way about me. We met in our first year and fell in love with each other. Our love grew during our 4 years at one of the state universities, and we got married 3 months after graduation. Abby is my true love, my soul, my everything. I couldn't imagine life without her. While we both love our 2 children to the core, it really has to be spontaneous when they're not around. Tonight was supposed to be just the 2 of us. We decided to go dancing with 3 other couples that evening. Since we had to stay out late and drink, we booked rooms in a hotel in the city center. My parents and I had agreed to take our 2 girls for the night, so it was going to be a really special night. It turned out to be something special, good, but not at all what I thought. When we got to the nightclub, I couldn't understand what was going on, but the mood seemed to have turned sour. The women seemed to be nervous about something, and one of the men seemed somehow smug. Of the 3 couples, I really liked George and Helen, and Bob and Anna. George was a software engineer, while Helen was a stay-at-home mom with 3 children. Bob owned his own plumbing company, and his wife worked in the office doing the bookkeeping. The only couple I didn't really like were Chad and Thelma. To tell you the truth, I had a good time with Thelma, but I thought Chad was a jerk. But Abby and Thelma were college roommates and remained good friends. So I had to put up with Chad. As far as I could understand, he had something to do with the film industry. I think Chad said he was an agent or something. From what I could gather, he was not very successful, but Thelma had a high-paying job as a pharmaceutical representative. I am a financial advisor at one of the major brokerage houses. When I first started in business, things were slow, but now I have more business than I want. The way it works with my firm is that once you reach a certain number of clients, the firm insists that you train someone and place a new consultant with your excess clients. Of course, you keep the most profitable clients for yourself. I've had to do this twice already, and I'm close to doing it again. I make a really good living. Abby began working as an administrative assistant for Mike Winston, executive vice president of a regional bank, when our 2 girls were born a year apart. Abby became a stay-at-home mom until Stacy, our youngest, entered 1st grade. Then one day, Mike called her and announced that he had been promoted to president, and he wondered if she would be interested in working for him part-time. Abby asked me, and I told her to go for it. If you think I made a mistake by letting Abby go back to work and now she's sleeping with her boss, you'd be completely wrong. Mike is 62 years old, bald, but more importantly, he is completely devoted to his wife and 5 children. Like I said, something was a little off, but I didn't know what it was, and at that moment, I didn't care. I was looking forward to an evening of dancing with my wife and a whole night of love afterward. We dispersed around the room as we knew several other couples who were there. If you dance well enough, you'll meet some really nice people. One couple was an old college friend, Fred Abbott, and his wife Brenda. I stopped to talk to them as Abby and the others walked to our table. I was about to join my wife when the music started, but then a noise was heard at the door. A crowd gathered at the entrance and then parted. Brenda gasped. "What's wrong?" asked Fred. "Don't you know who it is?" Brenda held her breath. I looked back and saw an extremely handsome man. He was only about 5 feet 6 inches or 7 inch, but as the women would say, he was gorgeous. Both Fred and I expressed our ignorance. "This is Brad Talbot," she blurted out. "He and his fiancée, Rita Summers, are 2 of the hottest stars in Hollywood." "Oh yeah," Fred said and started looking past Brad. "I wonder if Rita Summers is here too." "John, on a scale of 1 to 10, Rita is at least 15, Brenda playfully slapped her husband's arm. "Dream about it." When I looked at Brad, I really recognized him. He was one of my wife's favorite actors. I was wondering if I could get her an autograph, but what happened completely stunned me. Brad came straight to our table and asked my wife to dance. Without hesitation, she jumped up and danced with him for the next 4 songs. I walked over to the table and sat down, completely furious. My wife didn't even ask me if I was okay with her dancing with someone else. When the 5th song started, I wanted to intervene, but Chad's glass fell to the floor as he reached to pick up the broken glass. "John, could you help me with this?" he asked. I looked at my dancing wife and then at Chad. I should have just gone to my wife, but instead, I followed Chad into the men's room. However, when I got there, the cut was very minor. However, I helped him clean it and bandage it with a paper towel. When I returned to the table, I only caught a glimpse of my wife leaving with Brad. I rushed after them, Chad following closely behind me. As we walked out the front door into the parking lot, I saw Abby getting into the car with Brad. I ran to catch up with the car the moment I saw Brad kiss Abby's hand while she was laughing at something he said. Chad kicked my legs. I fell to the ground but got up in an instant. "What the hell did you do?" I yelled. "Brad is just going to take your wife for a ride," he said with a grin. Thelma appeared a few seconds later. "This is Abby's dream date," she told Chad and me. How much she liked Brad, so we agreed that he would ask her out. "This is my wife." I screamed. "Didn't you think I should know about this?" "Abby told us you would say no," Chad said with a grin. "Just go with the flow." "You go with this flow yourself," I shouted, pouncing and punching Chad right in the bridge of his nose. The sound of his nose shattering was the only good thing that night. Thelma then rushed at me, throwing punches and trying to kick me. Luckily for me, Fred saw what was happening and followed me. He quickly pulled Thelma away and sat her on the other side of him. He attacked my husband. Thelma started screaming. "No, he didn't do it," Fred said calmly. "You 2 attacked him first. He was just defending himself." Thelma became enraged and called 911. The police arrived about 10 minutes later and began taking statements. Fred continued his story, and I told the same thing, adding that Chad hit me in the legs first. The people who gathered after the riots saw only Thelma attack me. They told the officers that all they saw was me just trying to get away from her. Chad and Thelma were eventually arrested. By the time the police left, I was devastated. I returned to our table and saw 2 women smiling. "Where is everyone else?" Helen asked. "Chad and Thelma were arrested for assaulting me," I replied, trying my best to contain my anger. Abby left with Brad and seemed very happy about it. "This shouldn't have happened," Anna said. "She just had to go outside with Brad, take a few pictures, and then go back to the table." "My wife and Thelma obviously didn't tell you what the real plan was," I said, getting up to get a drink. Fred caught up with me at the bar. "Are you going to be okay?" he asked. "I don't know what the hell is going on," I admitted. "I hope my wife just went for a drive with this movie star and comes back soon. When she returns, we will have a very unfriendly conversation." "Look, John," Fred said concernedly, "I don't want to start a fire, but Brenda told me that Brad Talbot is a notorious womanizer. He seems to enjoy sleeping with married women. I hope this doesn't apply to Abby, but I think you should prepare for the worst." My heart sank. I didn't know what to do, but I told Fred I'd be fine before returning to the table. I tried calling Abby on her cell phone. the call immediately went to voicemail. The atmosphere was very awkward when I sat down. The wives looked very ashamed, and their husbands looked furious. I continued to try and reach Abby without success. Finally, 2 other couples said they were going back to the hotel. I told them I would stay for a while to see if Abby would come back. I waited half an hour before heading to the hotel. I waited there until 3 o'clock in the morning, calling Abby's phone every 10 minutes. Finally, in disgust, I checked out and headed home. I got there around 4 o'clock and sat on the sofa. I must have fallen asleep because the sun shining through our bay window woke me up. It was already 7 o'clock in the morning. I checked our bedroom, but Abby had not returned yet. Then I checked my cell phone, and there were no messages from Abby, so I logged into my computer and opened our Facebook page. It exploded with pictures of Brad and Abby leaving a nightclub, pictures of them walking into his house, pictures of Abby walking into Brad's house on his arm. I searched Hollywood websites, and they were all blown up by Brad's latest conquest with a married woman. At this moment, I was beside myself with rage. I immediately called my lawyer, and since it was Saturday, my call was forwarded to his home. He wasn't too happy about my call until I explained what was going on. He convinced me not to do anything until Abby came home and explained her behavior. Finally, around 11 o'clock, the front door opened, and Abby walked in with a big smile on her face. The smile disappeared when she saw the expression on my face. "We didn't do anything," Abby said immediately. "We just spent the night talking. I know I should have asked you, but I was sure you would say no. You know how much I love movies, and that Brad Talbot is one of my favorite actors. Last night was like a fairy tale. Nothing happened, John. I still love you with all my heart." I just stared at her, and I could almost feel the steam coming out of my ears. "I want you to pack up your things and go to your parents. I can't even look at you right now." "John, why do you make such a big deal about this?" she asked with irritation and slight fear in her voice. "We were just talking. There was nothing special about it. It doesn't really matter." "This is damn important to me," I said through clenched teeth. "I don't believe for a second that nothing happened. But for the sake of argument, let's pretend nothing happened. You still embarrassed me in front of the whole world." "Now you're just being overdramatic, John," Abby said, putting her hands on her hips. "Outside our group, no one knows anything, and Helen and Anna know that for me. It was just a harmless adventure." "You stupid," I snapped, which made Abby recoil. I'd never talked to her like that before. This is the top story on all Hollywood news sites. They have pictures of you and Brad leaving the nightclub, heading to his house, and by now, they probably have pictures of you leaving his house this morning. I think our marriage is over. So get your stuff together and get out before I do something I'll regret." "Please, John, I'm sure you're exaggerating." Abby was now on the verge of tears. "I love you with all my heart. Sorry if I upset you, but nothing happened. I knew you'd be annoyed, but I thought you'd give me a pass when you found out nothing happened. We have to deal with this." Then about the girls. "You weren't thinking about your girls when you ran off into the night with your movie star idiot," I hissed at her. "Would you like Stacy or Gail to do something similar when they become adults?" Abby turned pale at these comments and then burst into tears. "I'm so sorry, John. I didn't think it would be so important. I made a mistake. Please forgive me." "You're right, you didn't think." I was beside myself and getting angrier every minute. I had to get Abby out of the house before I did something I truly regretted. So I left her standing in the hallway and headed to our bedroom. I pulled a suitcase out of the closet and started throwing Abby's clothes into it. "I'll do it," Abby said through sobs after a few minutes. She then slowly packed her suitcase and carried it downstairs. I didn't even offer to help her carry it. I waited until she was out the front door before I slammed it shut. I looked out the window to make sure she was gone. I saw her put her bag in the trunk and sit in the driver's seat. Then she lowered her head to the steering wheel and began to sob. I didn't even want to go out and console her. I was too damn angry. About 20 minutes later, she started the car and drove away. I immediately called my parents and explained to them what happened. I asked if they would keep the girls a little longer, and if Abby shows up, tell her I have them. They agreed. I was then left to contemplate the ruins of my marriage. I started going over it all back and forth in my head. Abby insisted that nothing happened. Could this be true? I didn't know, but my gut told me she was lying. Can I accept what she did and try to move on? If, as she believed, no one knew about it except our friends, maybe. Now that it went viral, I didn't see any way forward for our marriage. I desperately wanted revenge on both of them, but I couldn't think of anything to achieve it. I cried for at least an hour, banging on the walls and doors as I walked around the house. I felt so powerless. I knew I couldn't get back at Brad. He was a Hollywood hotshot, and there was no way I could touch him. And I knew the divorce would hurt me financially, but if it came to that, I was prepared to work from home and sue for full custody of the girls. Since I was obviously the more stable of the two parents, I felt like I had a great shot at it. Around 1 o'clock in the afternoon, I was just making more coffee when the phone rang. Until now, the media had not received my phone number, but I knew that this would not last long. Hello, I answered the call. This is John Sawyer, and your wife's name is Abby, a female voice asked. Listen, I snapped, I'm not in the mood to talk to reporters. There was a quiet giggle, a bit like the ringing of bells. Okay, said the voice, I hate talking to them too. Who is this? I asked, fully prepared to hang up. My name is Rita Sewers, she answered quietly. I think you've already met my fiancé, Brad Talbot. Yes, I know this idiot, I replied. I didn't know where this conversation was going, but I wanted to end it as quickly as possible. Do you love your wife? Asked Rita. Her question puzzled me. I sighed. Despite everything my wife has done, I still love her. However, after everything that has happened, I don't think there is any chance of saving our marriage. I just can't come to terms with what she did. If I could offer you a way to hopefully save your marriage and also save my relationship with Brad, would you be interested? My heart began to beat unevenly. I had to sit down and think. Finally, I answered, yes, I would love to save my marriage, but I just don't see any way to do it. There was another quiet chuckle followed by a sigh. I've loved Brad for a long time. We have known each other since childhood. He comes from a very dysfunctional family, like me. His father was a womanizer, and as a result, his mother hated all men. She showed Brad absolutely no love. Nothing he did ever made his mother happy. He had slept with married women many times before. I think this is Brad trying to get the love his mother never gave him. In any case, I come from the same dysfunctional family. Only in my family, my mother was a drunkard, and my father abused me. Brad was all I had back then, and I loved him to the core. But then he left when his mother divorced his father. I cried for weeks. We reconnected in Hollywood after we both became famous. I had heard stories about Brad and was very wary of getting into a relationship with him. But as soon as we saw each other, we fell in love again. And when we got engaged, he promised me that relationships with married women were left behind. When I asked him about your wife, he stated that nothing had happened. I have no way of proving it one way or the other, but right now, the thought of losing Brad is driving me crazy. Yes, my wife also told me that nothing happened, I admitted, and the thought of losing her drives me crazy too. Do you believe her? No, I don't know, and I don't know either. I know Brad, and it would be completely out of character for him to bring a woman into his home and do nothing. But I suppose stranger things have happened. However, I am operating under the assumption that something actually happened. So I want him to understand the pain he caused me, and I want your wife to understand the same. I don't know if it will be enough, but I hope that if we succeed, we can move forward with our couples. I'm with you for now, I said. How are you going to achieve this? I'm not going to do this alone, we'll do it together, Rita replied. You'll have to spell it out because I don't see how I can do anything. First things first, she said, to get the most out of what I want to do, I need you to slowly open a dialogue with your wife towards a possible reconciliation. I'm going to do the same with Brad. I'm not talking to him right now. I'd say in 2 to 3 weeks, I'll start talking to Brad, and you should let your wife move in with you around the same time. I'll let you know when. You will still keep your distance, and you should not sleep with her. Why would I let her back into the house? I asked. Because as soon as she gets home, we will have dinner together, and I will explain my plan. I still have some parts of my plan that I want to think about, Rita explained. I still wasn't sure about it, but I didn't have any ideas, so I decided to go with it. The first thing I did was call my parents and tell them that I would pick up the girls in half an hour. I then called my administrative assistant, Joni, and told her that I would be working from home for the next week or so. I could tell from her voice that she already knew the story about Brad and my Abby. She was very helpful and told me to let her know if there was anything she could do to help. Finally, I called Abby's parents at home. Abby's father answered the phone and was very apologetic. He had seen some of the reports on the news and was ashamed. But he was extremely relieved when I asked to speak to Abby. She burst into tears over the phone, saying how sorry she was and how she wanted to come home so we could talk about it. "Listen, Abby," I said calmly, "I think it would be good for us to be apart for a while. Next week, I'm going to work from home. You will have to work from Monday to Wednesday. Why don't you pick up the girls on Wednesday night, then we'll talk about everything. I plan to pick up the girls on Sunday evening." "Please, John," she cried, "I want to go home now. I want us to be a family again." "You don't want us to be a family anymore." "I thought we were family," I said sadly, "but then you made me doubt everything I thought we had." "I'll see you on Wednesday evening, say around 5. I picked up the girls and told them that Mom would be spending a few days with their grandparents. They had a lot of questions about why, but the topic dropped when we headed to McDonald's. The girls ran around playing games for 2 or 3 hours, and then we had dinner there. The phone rang just as we got home. I looked at the caller ID but didn't recognize it. When I responded, the reporter asked me if I wanted to comment on my wife's affair with Brad Talbot. I hung up the phone after that. The phone rang every 5 minutes. I finally got off the hook and just left him around 6. My cell phone rang. It was Abby. "Why don't you answer phone calls?" she immediately demanded. "Because they were just reporters who wanted me to comment on your affair with Brad Talbot." "There's no romance," Abby growled. "I told you nothing happened." "Well, then you need to tell the rest of the world about it because, for some reason, they don't believe it," I said sarcastically. There was dead silence on the other end of the line. Abby then asked if she could talk to the girls, so I put them on the line and sat down, listening to that side of the conversation. They chatted about their day at McDonald's. Finally, Stacy handed me the phone and told me that my mom wanted to talk to me. Abby again begged to be allowed to return home. I told her I needed more time. On Wednesday night, Abby was there around 4 instead of 5. I was a little annoyed that she had ignored my instructions, but I decided to leave everything as it is. The girls were happy to see her, and Abby showered them with kisses. When she came towards me to kiss me, I backed away. She looked at me with pain and irritation. "So, this is how it will be now," she said irritably. "If that's the case, maybe I should just take the girls and leave." "If that's what you want to do," I said calmly and walked away. "No, John," Abby said quickly, with slight panic in her voice. "I think we should sit down and talk about our problems." The girls went to pack their overnight bags because Abby told them they would be visiting their grandparents. "What are we going to do?" Abby asked after an awkward silence. "I wish I knew," I replied. "Right now, I am hurt, humiliated, and angry. Any suggestions on how I can get rid of the big three?" "All I can do is apologize," Abby said, shaking slightly. "I made a huge mistake. Please, please forgive me." "I do not want to lose you, Abby." "It's not that simple," I said, leaning back and crossing my arms over my chest. "The whole world looks at me like I'm a cuckold. My wife cheated on me, and I didn't do anything about it." "I never wanted to hurt you," Abby cried. "I was so excited to meet Brad Talbot and see his home. I knew you'd be a little annoyed with me, but I never thought it would turn out to be such a mess. Abby, I want you to know that I sincerely hope that we can find a way through this," I said, and her face brightened for a moment. "But I also want you to know that I have consulted with an attorney. If this turns into a divorce, I want you to know that I will seek full custody of the girls. I think you should hire your own lawyer." "I don't want a divorce," she cried, and I won't let you take my girls from me. Abby, I'm not saying we'll get divorced, but I think we need to think about the worst-case scenario, I said, and I'm not trying to hurt you, I lied. But I think you need to keep in mind that with your recent notoriety, the court may look very favorably on my petition for custody. Please don't do this, Abby begged. I will do everything so that we can be together again. Why don't we just continue talking? I suggested. In fact, why don't we have lunch next Sunday when you hand the girls over to me? Suppose I decide to keep the girls with me, she said with a flash of anger in her voice. I don't like passing them back and forth. I don't think it's good for them. If you do this, then I will have no choice but to begin divorce proceedings immediately. And remember, it was you who tarnished your name. I believe that the court will not look favorably on an adulteress as a mother of impressionable girls, I warned. At that moment, all the fight drained out of Abby. I will not do it. I don't want a divorce. At the beginning of the second week, I returned to my office. My assistants were very sympathetic to this. Some of my clients, not so many, 2 in particular, thought it was really funny and started making fun of me. I politely asked them to drop the topic, but they continued to tease me. I've had enough. I told them I was ending our relationship and transferring their portfolios to another office. Even though they both tried to apologize, I told them that our relationship was over. Word got back to my clients, and there was no more talk about my wife and Brad. Around 2 o'clock in the afternoon, Rita called me. Do you have plans for tonight? She asked. When I made it clear that no, I didn't, she said, good, because you're having dinner with me at the Zoom Zoom restaurant at 7. Tie and jacket required, then she hung up. I was a little surprised when Rita told me she had a reservation at Zoom Zoom. This is the most exclusive restaurant in the city. It usually takes a year to book and is incredibly expensive. I arrived at 7 o'clock and was directed to a private room at the back of the restaurant. There was only a table for 2, but the room was quite luxuriously furnished. There was even a velvet couch. Scenes of possible activities that took place on this piece of furniture flashed through my mind. About 5 minutes later, the door opened, and I saw Rita Summers enter. When I jumped to my feet, I realized that she was literally taking my breath away. I had no doubt that the restaurant would have come to a complete stop when Rita entered. I figured she was about 5 feet 4 inches or so. She had long blonde hair, soft brown eyes, and a figure that drove you crazy. But it was her smile that attracted you. For the life of me, I couldn't imagine why Brad would cheat on a woman like that. Can I call you John? She asked, sitting down opposite me. I nodded and asked, how should I contact you, Rita? Of course, this gentle giggle made me smile. We ordered drinks and sat for a while, talking. I told Rita a little about my job, but mostly I told her funny stories about my girls or me when I was an awkward teenager. The waiter then returned and took our order. I didn't want to pressure Rita, but I was eager to find out what her plan was. I didn't mind saving my marriage, but I had no idea how to do it. When we finished eating, she leaned back in her chair. First of all, John, Rita said with a sad smile, that sneaky snake Chad Tompkins organized this whole mess. He fancies himself a film agent, but in reality, he is nothing more than a pimp. He sets up gullible men and women to be taken advantage of by movie stars. You wouldn't believe how many people, especially married women, get into bed with movie stars with Chad's help. You're talking to someone who knows this firsthand, I said with a growl. However, I didn't know what exactly Chad's job was. At least I was able to beat him up, really. Rita's eyes sparkled. It's good news, but you really shouldn't be too harsh on your wife. I believe Brad could charm Mother Teresa by removing her panties. As you already know, your wife is not the first married woman to fall under his spell. But I intend to make her the last, and if I can't do that, then what I'm offering will at least repay him and your wife for the pain they caused us. I cannot promise that once my plan is completed, either of us will still be with our loved ones. However, despite this, we will feel the satisfaction of having avenged their betrayal and lies. I was somewhat taken aback by Rita's willingness to cut my wife some slack, but I was very happy to hear that there would be some kind of payback. Now I just wanted her to tell me how we were going to do it. What exactly are you proposing? I asked. Before I get into the details, I just want to say that you are an extremely handsome man and you are also very charming. I think your wife was a fool for jeopardizing your marriage. If we met under different circumstances, I would be very interested in dating you. That's very kind of you, but we both know that we are traveling in completely different worlds. And you are not just stunning, but even more than that, you are incredibly beautiful. You are very kind. You're right about our two different worlds, of course, but that doesn't change the fact that I find you very attractive. Thank you is all I could think of to say because I wanted to know the plan. So, what are we going to do next? Within the next 2 weeks, I intend to become your client, Rita said. I'm sorry, I do not understand, client. Yes, you do offer financial advice to your clients, don't you? Rita said with a grin. Yes, sure, I said, still not understanding where she was going with this. Then I intend to invest some money, she said simply. However, we will have to have 3 or 4 meetings to discuss the agreements. I think 4 would be the ideal number. 2 of these meetings will take place in your office, and 2 will be lunch meetings. I'll choose the seats myself. Okay, I said, still not sure why I was going to do this. I can open an account, but you have to invest at least $10,000. Oh, I intend to invest much more than that, she said, smiling wider. In the meantime, you won't tell your wife that I'm your client. You will continue to meet with her and discuss reconciliation. In 2 weeks, you will let her move home, but you will not sleep with her. On the 15th of October, you and your wife will be attending a gala evening, which is of decisive importance. This will be an evening for the charity that I helped found and have been working with for 5 years. Most people don't associate charity with me, and I like that. I attend charity events every 2 years. I wouldn't have attended this year because I was at the last gala, however, I will be there, and you and your wife will be there too. Okay, I'll be with you at the charity gala, I said. I know for sure that tickets to this event cost $20,000 each. I can't justify spending that kind of money. Rita giggled again, then smiled. The tingling sensation went from the top of my head to the tips of my toes. Your tickets will be free. You just tell your wife that a client gave them to you. I still don't understand how this achieves anything, I said, now starting to get upset. Well, you see, John, part of the night's entertainment is the escort auction. Escort auction? Not that kind of escort, she giggled again. We sell willing men at auction to the women present. The woman or man who will pay the most for a particular person will put a sort of slave collar on him. Then the men are at the mercy of the women who paid for them, Rita said with a laugh before continuing. Most of them are bachelors, but married men expose themselves so that their wives can bid on them. Sometimes a married man is bought by someone other than his wife. I assume these married men are on their best behavior because otherwise, their wives would cut off their genitals. However, at this year's gala, one married man will be auctioned off, and his wife will not win the bid. And what happens after will not be innocent. There was still a look of confusion on my face. Rita laughed and patted my hand. You are a married man who will be put up for auction, and I'm the one who will have the winning bid. So, you just need to rent a tuxedo, buy your wife a new dress, and be my guest. It suddenly dawned on me what Rita had planned, and it was brilliant. Both Brad and Abby were going to feel what it was like for us. Of course, I knew it was all for show. But just spending the night with Rita Summers while everyone assumed the worst might happen would go a long way toward balancing the scales. That would take the cuckold horns off me and put them on Brad. Besides, my wife would feel the same pain and humiliation that I did. Then maybe we could meet with a counselor and put this all behind us. The next few weeks flew by very quickly. I have to say that the first time Rita walked into my office, I thought all the girls there were going to pee their pants. Our lunch meetings took place in very private restaurants. I didn't understand why we held these meetings in secret. Everything important could be discussed in my office. Most of the time, we just told each other stories. These were fun lunches, and I learned a lot about Rita and Brad. She really loved him, and she would be devastated if they broke up, but she was willing to leave him if he was going to continue his old behavior. A week before the gala, I allowed Abby to come home. However, I told her that I would sleep in the guest room. She was in pain, but she did not insist. The Wednesday before the gala, I came home with the tickets, and Abby's eyes lit up. She started ranting about all the celebrities that would be there. Then she scolded me for spending that amount of money. It didn't cost me anything, I told her. One of my clients asked me if I could use the tickets. I thought it would be a fun evening. By the way, I think you should buy a new dress, buy something. Abby was floating in the clouds. I almost felt sorry for her, but then I remembered that evening when I thought it would be a magical night for the two of us, only to look like a fool. It's time for her to feel my pain. When we arrived, we found that there were already about 500 people there. When we checked in, there was a table where you could sign up for the auction. I saw a line of men filling out forms. There were 5 really handsome men in line. So, I turned to Abby. "What do you say, Abby?" I asked innocently, pointing to the table. "This is a charity, and we didn't pay anything for the tickets. What do you say if I sign up, and you can bid on me?" Abby giggled, but it wasn't nearly as musical as Rita's. "I don't have any money, and I didn't even take my wallet with me because it wouldn't fit in this bag. As per Rita's suggestion, I had cash with me. Here's $1,000. I doubt you'll have to pay more than that. But it's a charity, so offer at least $200. You're worth $11,000 and much, much more," Abby said with a wide smile. I stood in line, and when I got to the registration table, I filled out the form and signed it. I looked at the list, and there were about 18 or 20 guys signed up. If I didn't know it was a setup, I would never have had the courage to do it. Just as I was about to turn away, the woman behind the counter asked, "Are you married?" I nodded, and she pulled out another form. "I hope your wife is with you, otherwise, you won't be able to take part. She needs to fill out this form and sign it." I called Abby over and explained what they wanted. She quickly filled out the form. What Abby didn't realize because she didn't read the form was that she agreed to let me do whatever the winning bidder asked. After the paperwork was completed, we went in search of our table. Rita seated us at a table with 2 starlets, 1 TV presenter, and 2 actors in a national soap opera. My wife had stars in her eyes, not only from the people at our table but also from the other celebrities at the gala. When the auction began, all the men who offered themselves were called. I smiled at my wife and stood up. As it turned out, there were 24 participants, and I'm sure that it was Rita's intention that they left me for last. By the time I was the last one on stage, they had already raised over $300,000. And I have to admit that the bidding was lively and fun. "Our last contestant is a local," said the announcer, a well-known game show host. "His name is John Sawyer, and he is married with 2 children. I'm sure his wife is emptying out her piggy bank somewhere in there. So, what do you say if we start the bidding at $50? "I think it's worth at least $100, shouted an elderly woman in front. "Can you wash dishes, honey?" I laughed and shouted back, "I can wash and dry." This caused loud laughter from the crowd. "This is more than my husband can do," exclaimed another elderly woman. "I'll give you $200. Then it became $500. Finally, I heard Abby shout, "I'll give you $1,000. This caused everyone to rejoice, but almost immediately, the younger woman offered $2,000. Before I knew it, the bid had risen to $5,000. I looked at Abby, and she was looking around completely confused. I just shrugged, looking at her. An offer of $10,000 came from the back of the room. This was quickly followed by another for $15,000. If I hadn't known that it was all a setup, I might have gotten a headache. The bid reached $25,000, and I began to get a little nervous. I thought a few thousand would seal the deal. It was much more than I expected. Finally, from the far end of the room, I heard Rita's voice. "I bet $100,000. There was a stunned silence, not only because of the amount but also because of who had placed the bet. Rita Summers walked down to just below the stage as the crowd roared. She smiled at me. She turned to the crowd and said, "And I don't even care if he knows how to wash dishes." Roars and cheers were heard again in the room. I must admit that I blushed a lot. Rita came up, put a traditional collar around my neck, and kissed me tenderly on the lips from the stage. By prior arrangement, we returned to where Abby was sitting. She was stunned. She didn't know what to do or say. So, I shrugged and said, "Well, I didn't plan this, Abby, but don't worry, it probably won't happen. Here are the car keys. As far as I understand the rules, I am Miss Summers' thing for the next 12 hours, maybe longer. See you at home tomorrow." Rita and I danced several dances at the gala evening. During these dances, she kept biting my ear. I saw Abby watching us with that deer-in-the-headlights look. When Rita took my arm and pressed her chest against me, walked out of the ballroom with me, I saw Abby's lips tremble. After the gala, Rita took me in a limousine to another nightclub. We danced and talked there for an hour. After that, we went to a private screening of the new film. There was no one in the theater except Hollywood A-list people. The movie, I thought, was crap. Rita thought so too, but when we talked to the director, we were both delighted with him. The limousine then took us to a very seedy part of town. After the car was parked, I noticed that there were 2 cars parked behind us. Rita explained that they were part of her security team. She pointed to 2 dilapidated houses on opposite sides of the street. The one with the porch light still on was once my home. Brad lived in the house across the street. It wasn't such a bad area back then, but it was still pretty seedy. It was already about 3 o'clock in the morning when we finally reached Rita's apartment. She explained that she has 6 apartments, 1 in Hollywood, 1 in New York, 1 in Florida, 2 in Europe, and 1 in South America. This particular apartment was 3 stories tall and could fit 2 regular-sized houses. We entered the office, and Rita poured me a drink. Sitting on the sofa, I started laughing. It's a pity that I didn't have a camera to take a picture of Abby. I almost feel guilty for doing this, but not really. Rita sat very close to me and put her hand on my knee. "John, tell me honestly, did your wife convince you that nothing happened?" "None of us will ever be able to prove it, but I believe they had him," I said sadly. "That's why it still hurts so much." "I know, John, and I'm 99.9% sure that Brad had a night with your wife," Rita said angrily at the thought. "I think this twist is fair game." With these words, Rita leaned over and kissed me tenderly. I was taken aback by this offer. I just assumed that we would go to Rita's house and sleep in separate rooms. Everyone would believe that we slept together, but we would know the truth. Now she was offering herself to me. It didn't take me long to make a decision. I suppose if I were a better person, I would refuse, but I was still hurt by what my wife did. Plus, who in their right mind would turn down the chance to sleep with Rita Summers? We kissed on the couch for about 20 minutes. It was intoxicating to be so close to such an incredibly beautiful woman. Finally, she took my hand and led me to her bedroom. Once inside, Rita began a slow striptease. It was hard from the first kiss. I wish Abby would do something like that to me. I would love to wake up like this sometimes. After Rita brought me to the finish line, we made love again. Then I looked at my watch and realized that it was almost 11 o'clock. "I should have been home by now," I said. Rita laughed at my crazy expression. "Remember, your wife didn't worry when you were waiting for her at home. And remember, nothing happened." I laughed, and we took a shower together. After drying off and getting dressed, Rita prepared eggs for me while she waited for the limousine to come pick me up. On the way home, I finally found peace. If Abby had wanted to, I felt like we could now work on putting everything behind us. When I walked into our house, I found Abby crying in the living room. "I wasn't sure you'd come home," she said miserably. "The news is abuzz that Rita Summers paid $100,000 to spend a night with you. At first, I thought it was just payback, but then I saw the way she looked at you. If she spent that much, she must really care about you. But I don't blame you for what you did. Do we have any future?" "First of all, Abby, I lied." "Nothing happened," I said. She looked at me, almost with anger in her eyes, but then it disappeared. "Really?" "Rita is my new client," I told my wife. She felt it was fair considering what Brad did to me. Besides, Rita is the one who gave me the tickets. She typically makes anonymous donations of $100,000 each year. This year, Rita made it public to send a message to her fiancé. So you're right, it was to repay Brad. Whether we have a future or not is entirely up to you. If you're ready to work on our marriage and go to counseling, I'm ready too." Abby ran into my arms, and I kissed her deeply. Then I took her to our bedroom. I don't know where I found the strength, but we made love twice. I then went back to sleep until my two girls pounced on me around 2 p.m. We had a quiet dinner with the girls, and after they went to bed, Abby and I sat on our patio holding hands. I knew then that we could put the pieces of our marriage back together. Abby and I found a good counselor, Wendy, and she was very helpful in solving our problems. Surprisingly, Wendy was much stricter towards Abby. I assumed that since she was a woman, she would be more sympathetic to my wife. But she pointed out that Abby was planning to take time away from our marriage while I wasn't planning on it. Even though we both insisted that nothing happened, I don't think Wendy believed either of us. Despite this, she said that the simple fact that we chose to leave our spouses with someone was a betrayal. Abby blushed deeply at most of it. Of course, Wendy gave me a pass of sorts because she basically saw my night as Rita's revenge on her fiancé. This was true, of course, but what Wendy didn't know was that I was up to my neck in planning and executing it. However, the sessions were very useful. There's one side effect to all this fuss: Abby doesn't like going to the movies anymore. She doesn't even like to watch movies on TV. However, she will go with the girls if they want to go to any children's movie. As for Chad and Thelma, I have dropped the charges against Thelma. I told the authorities that she thought she was protecting her husband, but I allowed the accusations to be made against Chad. He received 3 months in the county detention center. Chad and Thelma were kicked out of our group, and Abby no longer speaks to Thelma. They had a big fight because Abby blames Thelma for almost ruining our marriage. I won't say that I understand my wife's logic. Rita and Brad got married in the so-called wedding of the century. There were more than 1,000 guests there. If you weren't invited, you were nobody in Hollywood. In case you were wondering, Abby and I didn't receive an invitation. However, I did send Brad a wedding gift. I bought a pair of bullhorns and sent them to him with a note that read, "You leave my wife alone, and I will leave yours alone." I was still mad at Brad when I sent the antlers, but Rita told me that Brad thought the gift was hilarious. He hung them in his office with a framed note underneath. However, since Hollywood is Hollywood, the marriage lasted barely a year. True to her word, when Rita discovered that Brad was again chasing married women, she divorced him. It was friendly, and they are still friends. It's a shame because I know Rita loved him deeply from what she told me about their relationship over the years. I know that they truly had a connection that was much deeper than most couples. But obviously, this was not enough. And yes, Rita is still my client. When we opened her account, she deposited $1 million. I fully expected her to close the account as soon as her planned revenge was completed, but Rita left it with me. When the amount grew to $1.5 million, she contributed another $2 million. I haven't seen her in person since the day after the gala, but I talk to her at least 4 times a year to discuss her investments. Sometimes she calls with a question about her account, but sometimes she calls just to talk. I enjoy these conversations the most. Rita is a very savvy businesswoman. Surprisingly, she is also quite conservative, at least in her investments. I have no idea what her policy is. Even when I update Rita's portfolio quarterly, we go through her account in about 20 minutes and then spend the next hour or 2 talking about our lives. After Rita divorced Brad, she told me that she should have left me and left Brad. I laughed and reminded her that we lived in 2 different worlds. Since then, Rita has been teasing me about keeping an eye on me. And it's her supposed plan that if the stars ever line up so that I'm lonely and she decides to quit playing, she'll do whatever it takes to get me. I know she's just joking, but it's a good fantasy that I keep in the back of my mind. Abby and I are approaching our 10th wedding anniversary. We've had a few rough patches, but overall, it's been a great marriage so far. Looking back, I am convinced that if Rita had not come to my rescue, I would have divorced Abby, and today, I cannot imagine what life would be like without her. Oh yes, and one last thing, Abby is pregnant, and we are having a little boy. I can hardly wait for this. What do you think of our story today? As far as I'm concerned, the wife is completely wrong for going out with her favorite actor without telling her husband, and because of that their marriage broke up for a while.
Any lie will be revealed sooner or later. Greetings, my dear friend. In this story, the main character's wife tells him that she will be able to cheat on him, and he will never know about it. It seems to be an insignificant fact, but when he notices the red flags in her behavior, he decides to act. So, let's listen and find out all the details while you leave your powerful like on this video and subscribe to the channel. Let's go. It's Friday night again, and even though I got home late, my wife Victoria came back even later. I'm not thrilled that she goes out with friends after work, but I understand how important it is to have a life separate from your partner. Victoria, or Vicky as I call her, was prudent enough to tell me about her plans, where she was going, and she tried to get home early. She usually returned by 8 p.m. I received a check at work that day, and I got a message from Vicky saying that the four of them were going to have a drink. She also mentioned that she would be home late. Vicky was known for keeping an eye on her appearance, but this only happened once every 3 to 4 weeks. Still, it bothered me. To be honest, I have problems with trusting not only women, but also people in general. Vicky is a woman who likes to spend time in bars with friends or travel for business, often without a partner, although she did both. It was her frequent trips that were the biggest problem for me. You may wonder why this issue affects my perception of Vicky. Let me share a short and dark anecdote to help you understand. I grew up in a bar, literally. My parents owned the most famous bar in our small town near St. Louis, Missouri. In addition to the elite French restaurant they owned, there was a bar located in the same building. Visitors from all over the world came to the restaurant to eat and then went to the nearby bar to dance the night away. Seeing all this at a young age, my parents inspired me to be careful. When I turned 16 that summer, they decided it was time for me to gain business experience, just like my older brothers and sisters who started working in the same industry at the same age. When I started working at this establishment, my brother was 21 years old, had received a diploma in hotel and restaurant management, and was running a bar at the same time. My sister was almost 19 and starting college. Because of my youth, I wasn't allowed to work in the bar, so I started working as a waiter in the restaurant. I was very offended by this decision because, like many teenagers, I dreamed of spending my days freely walking with friends. I wanted to work as little as possible and at the same time earn well in my chosen field. I had only been working at the restaurant for 3 weeks when my perception began to change. Seeing so many beautiful young women made me feel like I was in a dream. There were times when my parents had to remind me to focus on my work and not get distracted by the view. My sister was also working that evening, which further enhanced the glamour of the night. When she came up to me, she warned me, "Donnie, you have to focus on your job and not pay attention to anything else. Otherwise, you're going to get in trouble." I replied, "But sister, Mrs. Horton is there with a man, and she's not even wearing underwear. Do you think Mr. Horton knows? I can't wait to tell the guys. It's amazing." Sarah looked scared and glanced over her shoulder before cursing softly, "Damn." At that moment, I felt the weight of my father's hand on my shoulder. He squeezed it tightly and said in an authoritative tone, "Don, follow me immediately." Without hesitation, he led me through the dining room, past the servers, and into his office. I followed cautiously, feeling anxiety creeping up on me. Standing in front of him that evening, I knew the conversation was not going to be easy. With a stern look, my father told me to close the door and sit down. I prepared for what was coming, realizing that I was about to have a serious conversation with him. Oh, how I was afraid of what was going to happen. I thought I was going to be sick. I sat and looked at my father. After a while, he sighed and spoke. "Don, I should have discussed this with you before I allowed you to start working here, but I didn't. I had the same conversation with your brother and sister, and it doesn't make it any easier," he said suddenly, then turned to me and asked, "Mrs. Horton is very attractive. Isn't she, son?" I was so stunned that I jumped slightly, and a wave of dizziness washed over me. I was confused by the sudden change of subject and what he meant by his question. When I figured out what to say, he repeated, "Isn't that right?" I nodded hesitantly, muttering to myself, "Yes." My father leaned forward, resting his chin on his interlaced fingers, and his expression became sad. After a while, he leaned back in his chair and spoke, his words ringing in my head even after 2 decades. He told me that their business was not just a job. It was our whole life, and it was how he supported his family. The business allowed us to have a beautiful house with a swimming pool, send my brother to college, and in the future provide higher education for my sister and me. As long as they didn't do anything wrong, the business continued to take care of us for many years. He said to always greet familiar clients with a smile and by name, and even visit them during work if the client allowed. In such a business, it is very important to have selective hearing and vision. Discretion is a key point when working in the field of catering and bars. You shouldn't see anything you shouldn't see. If someone you know enters a room with a member of the opposite intim who is not a member of their family, address them as sir or madam, unless you have been instructed otherwise. It's important not to remember their visit and everything related to it. Forget all the details about their actions or clothes. In our establishment, we put the prudence of customers first, referring not to notice questionable behavior as long as it remains within our walls. Our staff adheres to high standards of conduct, and strict rules ensure professionalism. Any employee caught gossiping about a client will be fired immediately, regardless of their previous work performance. Over the years, we've had to part ways with some great employees who didn't meet our privacy standards. Our reputation is built on our discretion, as well as the exceptional quality of our food and service. You are young, and I understand that you have active hormones. In fact, even at my age, I can appreciate an attractive woman like Mrs. Horton. Your mom knows about this and understands that you will notice attractive women, but she also understands that it's like going to the store. You look, but you don't touch. I don't expect you to ignore your natural instincts, but I expect you to be restrained and not as obvious as you were today. There's something else you need to remember, son. People like Mrs. Horton are always in danger of being discovered. Gossip tends to spread and eventually reaches her husband, which can lead to the breakup of their marriage. Those who are unfaithful to their spouses often become careless, and as a result, they are caught. It is important that we do not encourage such behavior. Many of these people have young children, and divorce can have a devastating effect on them. Let's focus on our work and be mindful of the consequences of our actions. I returned to work at the restaurant that day and continued to work there from time to time throughout high school and college. Despite witnessing many deceptions at a young age, I never gossiped about clients. As I got older and worked in a bar, I witnessed groups of men and women attending parties, often divided by gender. It was during such parties that I observed how married people behaved in ways that did not indicate marital fidelity. This experience taught me a valuable lesson. Perhaps I have absorbed too much knowledge, as I became intolerant of those who attend parties with members of the opposite night and stay up late. I noticed that many people who came to the city on business behaved hesitantly, trying to pick up locals for romantic encounters. While this is acceptable if they're single, it upsets me when I see many of them wearing wedding rings or showing that they are married. In some cases, they even engaged in extramarital affairs with our married clients. This behavior makes me feel disrespected and disgusted with them. We treat everyone with the same courtesy and consideration, aiming for a successful business. I noticed a pattern. Those who left the party early entered into stable marriages, while those who stayed late often faced marital difficulties. In my freshman year of college, my father hired a new waitress named Victoria. Despite the initial feeling of lust, over 2 years of working together, we fell in love with each other. In the end, we decided to date. We got to know each other's families and relatives and discovered that we shared a deep friendship. Watching the various characters who frequented the bar, we laughed at their foolish behavior. Then, during Christmas before I graduated from college, I proposed to Vicky, confident that we were kindred spirits with the same values. The only problem we faced was that our parents insisted on a prenuptial agreement. Vicky and I were sure that we were destined to be together forever, but we both thought it was silly to plan for the worst. However, when I found out that my parents had a successful business and a significant investment portfolio that they wanted to protect for me, I realized how important it was to safeguard our future. To my surprise, Vicky's parents had the same idea. They had accumulated a considerable fortune and were categorically opposed to Vicky being left without an inheritance in the event of a divorce. Thanks to a carefully crafted agreement, both sets of parents were able to protect their assets and ensure our financial stability. We agreed that all the things we had before marriage or inherited from our parents would remain with us in case of divorce. This also included our pensions, which each of us would keep for ourselves. The only thing we would share was the property that we acquired together after getting married. The agreement even stipulated custody of the children in case of divorce, if we had minor children. If one of us traveled more often, the children would stay with the parent who traveled less. Finally, graduation day arrived, marking the beginning of a new chapter in my life with Vicky. Vicky successfully completed her bachelor's degree in finance and got a promising position at a local brokerage firm. Meanwhile, I earned a degree in construction management and majored in landscape architecture. After graduating from university, I gained valuable experience by working for 2 years at a construction company, honing my skills in the field. Neither Vicky nor I were interested in a career in the restaurant or bar business. My parents had transformed the business into a corporation and entrusted its management to my sister and brother. Mom continued to work as an accountant, and Dad retained the role of boss, despite not being officially recognized as such. After 2 years of working for another company, I decided to open my own construction and landscaping business. Vicky and I were struggling to make ends meet, paying for a house and a car, so my parents were essentially providing financing for the family corporation's business. I received a salary to keep an eye on its management. At first, I faced some difficulties, but Vicky constantly progressed and eventually rose through the ranks. She later returned home one day, beaming with happiness, after being selected for a position in the compliance department of a brokerage company. This department was responsible for ensuring that satellite offices complied with all the rules of the Securities and Exchange Commission. The only drawback was that her new position involved constant business trips, usually for 3 to 4 days a month. But the past still haunts me. Over time, my business flourished, moving from minor alterations to the construction of additional premises, garages, and eventually entire new buildings with landscaping. Pleased with the growth of my business, I didn't think about transferring ownership from the corporation to my name. Instead, I enjoyed the increase in salary and watched the value of the business and our income grow every year. Slowly but surely, I began to come to terms with Vicky's frequent trips. I never felt completely at ease with her, especially when she went for evening walks with friends. She went outside sometimes, but no more than once a month, and always returned home by 8 p.m. I also had my own things to do, and sometimes drank beer with colleagues after a long day at work. It was just part of good management, but I made sure not to overdo it and always left after a couple of drinks. Even when meeting with employees, I tried to return home no later than an hour after the usual time, unless, of course, Vicky was walking with me. After we had been married for 3 years, Vicky and I decided to have children. Our first child, Patrick, was born, and 18 months later, our baby Susanna arrived. She was so tiny, but as she grew, she controlled me. By the age of 4, she had become like her mother, a younger version of her. When she grows up, my heart will definitely stop. As Vicky's work experience grew, she became known as a specialist in solving difficult situations in offices. When faced with problems, she skillfully found solutions. When confronted with opposition, she fearlessly confronted the violators. If necessary, she did not hesitate to refer the case to higher authorities and applied more stringent measures. Many office managers who challenged her authority ended up looking for new jobs. As a result, Vicky began to travel more often on business trips, sometimes being away for up to 2 weeks a month. Both she and I were unhappy with the situation. After discussing our problems, she expressed her desire to head the department for the next 2 years, hoping for an end to the business trips and a significant salary increase. We agreed to hold on to hope for such an opportunity, but due to the economic downturn, my small company was forced to look for jobs that we had hoped to avoid before the collapse of the housing and stock markets. As a result, we had to lay off about half of the employees. We didn't experience financial difficulties due to the lack of significant loans or overhead costs, but our profitability decreased. The decision to take on a minor job ultimately had a detrimental effect on my marriage. If I had never accepted this job, perhaps my marriage would have remained intact. When I walked into my office on Thursday morning, I wondered why I had come to work at all. I had stayed late the night before and finished all the papers that were on my desk. Vicky had left for the whole week to get tested for compliance with the standards. From talking to her, I realized that she wouldn't be home until late Friday night, so I was working this morning. I almost immediately went to one of our 3 work sites to spend the day getting my hands dirty and checking out the work. As many of you know, the best way to keep employees on their toes and ensure quality is when the boss is on the workplace floor with them, leading by example. I hadn't been sitting at my desk for long when my assistant called me. She said, "Don, we have a relaxed atmosphere here. I try to treat my employees like family members. Mrs. Sloan is here and wants to talk about floor construction and backyard landscaping. Do you have time to visit her?" It was good that I thought of a nice little porch and a few bushes, but I decided to talk to her anyway. After all, a couple of days of work might be appropriate and help some men feed their families. When Mrs. Sloan came into my office, I was amazed. She bore a striking resemblance to Mrs. Horton, the first lady who caught my attention many years ago. Struggling to choose my words, I pulled myself together and stood up to greet her, smiling. I introduced myself as Don Patterson. Mrs. Sloan replied, "Do you want to build a porch?" Confused, I asked her to sit down so we could discuss her requirements. I couldn't help but notice that she looked very much like someone from my past. As soon as she entered the room, it was as if she had appeared out of thin air. "Please forgive me," I said. Mrs. Sloan giggled before confessing, "Don, it's me, Jasmine. Danita and Alfred Horton are my parents, and we often visited your family's restaurant." When she saw the puzzled expression on my face, she added, "You know, Jas Horton." Overwhelmed with realization, I exclaimed, "Oh my God! I'm so sorry, you've grown so much since then." Jasmine let out a melodious laugh, then said, "I guess we've all changed over the years. I was only 10 years old when my parents separated. Mom took me in, but then we couldn't afford your services." Sighing longingly, Jasmine continued, "But recently my husband and I bought a house near our old neighborhood. He's already said that he wants to add a veranda and a jacuzzi to the house. If the prices are reasonable, we may do so. When I found out about your construction business, I couldn't resist contacting you to see if you'd like to take on this project before considering other options." Most of the morning was spent reminiscing about the past and discussing the plans she and her husband, Stephen, were considering. When we got a general idea of her wishes, I mentioned that I would need to inspect the house and take measurements before making an offer. She replied, "No problem, Don. We can go right now, or at any time convenient for you, since I'm not working." I suggested, "How do you like this option? I'll take care of everything. Can I come to your place around 1 o'clock this afternoon? I need to check on my workers, have a snack, and then I'll have the rest of the day to take measurements and make an estimate. Will that suit you?" After Jasmine left the office, I followed her and informed my secretary, Laura, that I would not be back until the end of the day. I planned to visit all the work sites, have lunch, and then evaluate Mrs. Sloan's project. Please close the door when you leave, and if you need me, you can contact me on my mobile phone. The work was going smoothly until I decided to stay late to visit one of the property owners, which made me late for lunch. When I arrived at the Sloans around 2:30, Jasmine met me at the door. I immediately apologized to Mrs. Sloan for my lateness, explaining that I had been waiting for the hostess of the house and tried to call her, but I only got through to the answering machine. Mrs. Sloan giggled and explained that she had forgotten her cordless phone while cleaning the pool. "Since you're here, would you like to have a drink or explore the area?" "I'm fine, Yasmin. Let's just go outside and see what your backyard looks like." I took all the measurements and noted that it wasn't difficult for me to calculate everything I usually use, but since you don't have a jacuzzi, you'll have to purchase one before I can give you the price. Before ordering the necessary materials, I will need to know its dimensions. Jasmine mentioned that she thought I would also provide a jacuzzi. She admitted that she didn't know much about them and asked if I could include her in the order. I grinned and said I could do it, but we don't sell jacuzzis, so I'd have to buy it somewhere else. To continue, I needed to know what size tub she wanted, whether it would be grounded or self-contained, and whether it would run on 200 or 110 volts. Seeing Jasmine so upset, I was comforted by remembering her emotional nature from her youth. I suggested that we discuss her experiences and then she could turn to her husband. I assured her that we could postpone taking the jacuzzi until she felt better. But Jasmine's expression changed to genuine concern as she replied, "I can't talk to him about it. He instructed me to look into the situation, and I plan to follow his instructions. He's currently on a business trip to Denver, so I will only be able to see him this weekend. Perhaps then we can resolve this issue." I asked Jasmine how she used the bathroom and found out that they rarely had guests. She mostly used the pool and the backyard, occasionally accompanied by one or two friends. After gathering enough information, we went to my supplier and let her inspect the jacuzzi. Jasmine decided to purchase a smaller bathtub that could accommodate up to 5 people. After taking measurements, we returned to her house. I asked if I could use the internet to clarify some details of the budget, which changed frequently on Thursdays, and to make sure I had an accurate price list before starting work. Jasmine was happy to offer me a place in her office to connect to the internet. Steve, a representative of the manufacturer, Save and Business Systems, also worked in the office. His office was impressive, allowing him to work from home when he wasn't on a business trip, either by connecting a laptop to our network portal or using our computer. All options were convenient. When I entered the office, I was amazed at how much it resembled a typical office in a commercial building. His desk, located to the left of the entrance, overlooked the backyard. There were 2 elegant leather armchairs in front of the table and a bookshelf opposite. In general, the setup made a lasting impression on me. Jasmine came to the table and pulled out a chair for me, smiling. She invited me to sit down while I was working. "If you need anything, just let me know," she said kindly. "Thank you," I replied, walking up to the table. I put the laptop on the surface and sat down. Jasmine handed me a DSL cable to connect to the computer, but when I reached for it, I accidentally took a photo instead. When I stopped, I looked at the photo and was immediately fascinated. I pulled my hand away and stared at her. I reached out and grabbed the cord, causing Jasmine to look at me with a puzzled expression. As she handed me the cord, she noticed the expression on my face and how tightly I was holding the photo. "Dawn, is everything okay?" she asked, concerned. "This is my husband, my pride and joy," Jasmine explained. I tried to convince him to replace this photo with one of his children, but he refuses. I'm tired of seeing his ex-girlfriend every time I sit down at the table. "Dawn, please don't look at me like that," she said. "What happened?" Jasmine asked again. I carefully put the photo back in its place and walked away from the table. I turned to Jasmine and asked, "Didn't you say your husband was in Denver?" She seemed confused but then confirmed, "Yes, I talked about it." "Why are you asking?" I explained, "My wife has been in Denver all week." I continued, "Jasmine, did you ask Stephen for advice on where to get certified, or did you mention that you plan to talk to me?" She shook her head and replied, "No, Dawn. What does it matter? He just mentioned the terrace and the jacuzzi and told us to get an estimate. He said that if it doesn't cost more than $20,000, then we can negotiate. So, why all these questions? By the way, the woman in the photo with Steve is my wife, Victoria." She giggled and commented, "It's funny how life works out, marrying Steve's ex-girlfriend after only being married for 18 months. "When did you get married?" I asked, looking at Jasmine and feeling a knot in my stomach. "Vicky and I have been married for 9 years, I replied. "This photo must have been taken only a couple of years ago, because it shows a necklace that I bought for Christmas around that time." Jasmine froze for a moment before speaking. "Dawn, I'm really sorry for you if what I think is true. But okay, why does it bother you that she's in Denver?" "Jasmine, you mentioned that you've been married for 18 months. Do you know when this photo was taken?" "Judging by Vicky's outfit in the photo, it looks like it could have been around the time of your wedding." "When did Steve get the shot? Why does he claim that the photo could not have been taken at that time when, in fact, it was taken on the day he won first prize at the Chevrolet State Auto Show?" Jasmine began to cry. She sank into an overstuffed chair in front of her desk, her voice barely above a whisper. "It was 3 weeks before our wedding," she began, regret in her voice. "I didn't suspect anything. He claimed it was an old photograph, but first of all, he proudly clutched it in his hands. Damn him. Jasmine, please, I begged. Let's think this over carefully." I remembered how I worked in a restaurant, where I learned to turn a blind eye to other people's affairs and remain silent, knowing that traitors would sooner or later be exposed. I understand that the situation may seem suspicious, but at the moment, We can only confirm that Steve and Vicky are hugging in front of his car. The photo was apparently taken about 18 months or 2 years ago. You're much younger than us, so it's unlikely that Steve could be Vicky's ex-boyfriend. We started dating when we were 18, and we both worked at my dad's restaurant. But there is a possibility that he could be one. I know the names of everyone she was in love with when she was young. You probably don't know Steve very well. By the way, do you know how old he is? Well, he's 29, and I'm 27. Probably because Vicky isn't yet 31, Jasmine said. I don't know what to do now. If we ask them about it, they will surely deny it, regardless of whether they had an affair in the past or not. What if they're having an affair now? Maybe they'll decide to run away or become more careful. I feel compelled to make inquiries, but for now, I would say that I fully trust Vicky. I was at a loss. After further discussion, we developed a plan that we considered appropriate. We agreed not to reveal our suspicions that day. Jasmine promised not to tell Steve about our conversation, and we decided to enlist the help of a private investigator to check on Vicky and Steve. The next day, Jasmine and I contacted the security company that monitored our construction sites. They recommended the detective company they worked with, and we spoke to their team. After agreeing to their services, we signed a contract and provided checks for each part of the prepayment. Jasmine changed the name on her check to avoid suspicion from Steve, and I used a business account for mine. Since Vicky had never seen any checkbooks or receipts, I was confident in our actions. 3 weeks later, Jasmine and I had a meeting with the detective. I'm really sorry, the detective began, or vice versa. I am happy to inform you that we haven't found anything that would indicate that your spouses are together or even know each other. We watched them every day after work, and they didn't do anything they shouldn't have done. There was only one strange event. After work, Vicky and several of her female colleagues decided to go to St. Louis for the night. They visited several bars and danced with different men all evening. Vicky danced with Steve only once, keeping a decent distance between them and making sure that their communication remained appropriate. There was no physical intimacy or inappropriate behavior during the dance, and after that, they didn't communicate anymore. Listening to this, I shook my head and leaned back in my chair, looking from the investigator to Jasmine. It dawned on me, perhaps my deep-rooted distrust, nurtured by years of working in the family business, was the real culprit behind this chaotic situation. I had meticulously looked through all the phone records, placed cameras and dictaphones all over the house, and even put dictaphones in the car in Vicky's purse, but found nothing incriminating. After a little thought, I confessed, I can't express how relieved I am to learn the truth. I'm ashamed that I suspected Vicky and Steve of such actions. Let's get this over with, I said. Wait a minute, Jasmine said. Didn't you say that Steve is going to San Antonio next week? Jasmine looked puzzled, but then confirmed that this was the case. Does this mean that we won't need to monitor anyone next week? I think now is the time to keep an eye on them, I replied. A couple of weeks ago, Vicky told me that she had a compliance check scheduled for next week. Although I don't remember the exact location she mentioned, I believe it will be in Austin, Texas. Depending on which areas of these cities they visit, the distance between them may be as little as an hour, or even less. Obviously, such checks are not usually carried out in our area. That's why I think we should keep a close eye on the upcoming trip. If after that it turns out that they are innocent, I am ready to admit that I may have gone too far. Despite the evidence in the photo, logically, if they were old friends, Vicky would have no problem posing with him and his trophy. Despite all the doubts and inquiries, Jasmine and I could not find any changes in Vicky and Steve's communication with us. They remained the same as they had always been. I've been thinking about this for a while, I said. I couldn't help but notice that Vicky hadn't changed much since we started dating, and even after we got married, she continued to treat me as if I were the center of her world. She was always there when I needed her, and our intimacy remained strong. She never hesitated to turn to me for love or to fulfill my desires. She remained loving and attentive as always. On Friday evening, the night before Vicky's upcoming trip, we went on a romantic dinner date. Later, when we were snuggled up in bed, I couldn't help but reminisce about our past. Do you remember how we used to work at Dad's restaurant and laugh at all the scammers and people doing inappropriate things? I asked. I felt a subtle tension in Vicky's muscles, although I couldn't be sure. She smiled at me and answered affirmatively. It was obvious that some of the people we encountered were not particularly intelligent. From time to time, when one of my colleagues does something like that, I remember those times and wonder at their stupidity. I continued. What prompted you to ask this question? She asked. I explained. One of my colleagues suspects that his wife may be cheating on him, but hasn't found any hard evidence. When he told me about his concerns, I calmed him down and advised him to stay calm. I told him to be observant and attentive because the truth about infidelity can always come out. I stressed that it's important to take the time to properly understand the situation, especially for the sake of their children, because divorce can be very difficult for them. Vicky seemed a little saddened by my words, perhaps by the idea that our marriage might inevitably lead to divorce. Maybe the wife really loves her husband, and the affair doesn't matter much to her, she said. Perhaps she won't seek a divorce. I replied, oh my God, Vicky, he looks a bit like me. You mentioned that he doesn't go to bars and holds a strict stance against infidelity, just like us. I can't imagine her being involved in a long-term affair, like you or me. He might agree to a one-night stand, but a full affair seems unlikely. Vicky tensed when I said I wasn't ready for a long-term commitment, but then she smiled and turned to face me. She kissed me gently and said, I'm glad you're still the man I married. We both understand the pain that extramarital affairs bring. If he really has problems, let's try to put him on the right path. Maybe together, we can help him heal. Good night, my love. Vicky and I cuddled up to each other and soon fell asleep, though neither of us could fall asleep quickly. We tossed and turned the whole night. The next week was especially difficult for me. I contacted the investigators twice to find out about any progress, but they only informed me that their detectives were monitoring the situation and would provide a report the following Monday. When Monday finally came, Jasmine and I gathered at the investigator's office. As we sat down, there was a palpable tension in the air, as if bad news was imminent. The investigator leaned back in his chair and confessed, to be honest, when you asked us to follow up on your partner's situation last week, I was skeptical. It seemed to me like a pointless idea, but as it turns out, this is one of the most difficult infidelity cases we've ever faced. You were right. Steve and Vicky are really having an affair. We have concrete evidence in the form of photographs and recorded conversations. I have to say, I'm just amazed. He continued, if only we'd stopped after we tracked them down in St. Louis, we never would have encountered this in the Louis area. Judging by the conversations we overheard, they meet in remote cities only 3 or 4 times a year. And even then, if they happen to be in the same city, they treat it like a chance meeting, trying to maintain the facade of old acquaintances. But what we've found is a duo of astute tricksters who carefully plan their meetings in different cities and hotels. He paused before adding, they eventually crossed paths at the 3rd hotel, but chose to stay in separate rooms with an adjoining door. Steve paid for the room in cash to avoid leaving paper trails, and Vicky used a credit card in the name of Angela Foster, with an address in Washington, Missouri. She also had a government ID card in the same name. Steve registered under the name Stephen Allen and used his ID card for verification. In addition, they booked rooms only for the period from Tuesday to Thursday. Their stay was short-lived. They only saw each other for those 2 days. I leaned back in my chair and thought about the situation. Foster. Vicky's maiden name is Victoria Angela Foster, I noted. Jasmine added, Allen is Steve's middle name. After thinking about it, I decided everything seemed to be said and done, except for the sadness. I will make an appointment with a divorce lawyer as soon as possible, I said. Jasmine began, but the investigator interrupted her. Wait, that's not all. I usually don't bring up this topic, but something about this situation doesn't sit right with me. It seems like this is not just a casual affair. It feels like they were involved in some kind of game. We have hours of recorded conversations that confirm this. Most of the actions were innocent, intercourse during the entire week. However, the conversation in bed was unusual, which prompted me to turn on the recording to further clarify the circumstances. As the recording played, Vicky's voice rang out. You know, Steve, I think it's time for us to get this over with. We've been doing this for 6 years now, proving that we are the exception to the rule and clever liars. I think we both agree that making love with our spouses is much more enjoyable than with each other. Besides, I'm worried about what Don mentioned on Friday night as we lay in bed. Do you remember the lesson we were taught at his parents' restaurant? That all traitors are eventually exposed. I was hooked. No one really studies all possible scenarios, and scammers inevitably become overconfident or make minor mistakes that lead to their collapse. Denver still bothers me. This was our first visit to the same city together, and I can't help feeling that it was a mistake. We should have stuck to our original plan to meet only in cities that were close enough for us to meet in the center, as we do now. I understand that renting 2 rooms and paying for one that isn't in use can be inconvenient and expensive, but we've already shown that we are smart enough to circumvent the rules. By playing strategically, we can cheat and come out victorious. I absolutely don't want to do anything that could jeopardize my relationship with Don. I adore him more than anything in the world. He's the most amazing man I've ever met. To be honest, after our first meeting, the only thing that pleased me in our relationship was the meticulous planning and intrigue. I could spend hours carefully thinking through plans and strategies, collecting documents, arranging housing, and coordinating trips. It gave me more pleasure than solving a crossword puzzle or Sudoku. Love seems like just a dulling of the senses in comparison. The investigator paused the recording and continued. Don't try to pretend that it doesn't concern you. I remember you admitting in Denver that you never leave your hotel room without a sense of accomplishment. He looked at me intently and then added, there are many more interesting things in this story, but for me, this is the most mysterious part. I just can't figure out why. I couldn't help but burst out laughing, but quickly pulled myself together and apologized. I'm sorry, I don't find any humor in this situation, and I'm very angry. But it seems to me there is something important in this conversation that I need to touch on. A few years ago, a couple that Vicky and I were close to went through a divorce. The husband discovered that his wife had been cheating on him for almost 4 years before she was caught. It was a shocking discovery, but it turned out to be a simple mistake on her part. That evening, when we found out about the betrayal and the divorce, we were in the company of friends. In the conversation, we touched on the topic of deception and the stupid actions of cheaters. I remembered the words my father had said during our work at the restaurant and what we had witnessed during our shift. Vicky believed that anyone could successfully cheat if they were careful and cunning, but I did not agree with her, arguing that the cheater would inevitably be exposed. It's inevitable, I warned her. Deception will always surface, albeit in a seemingly innocent form. Despite our determination, Vicky casually mentioned that clever liars often get away with everything. Looking back, I realized that her infatuation with Steve coincided with our argument. Vicky has always valued her intelligence, and I was afraid that by discussing the affair, I might inadvertently challenge her. She was determined to demonstrate her abilities and her ability to avoid consequences. I think she could have succeeded if she had stopped earlier, but now she can't escape the consequences. Jasmine and I had come to a decision, and were now preparing to consult with a divorce lawyer. After successfully splitting the investigator's fee, we agreed to hire a lawyer for our divorce. When I entered the office, the lawyer seemed taken aback. Mr. Patterson, he said, gesturing toward Jasmine and Mrs. Patterson. I smiled and politely declined. I'm sorry, but I don't think so, sir. My name is Don Patterson, and this is Jasmine Sloan. We found out that our spouses were cheating on us and decided to share the cost of hiring a private investigator to collect evidence. Now, we thought it would be fair to split your fee as well. Lawyer George Spaulding smiled and pointed to a chair, offering, well, let's see if we can come to an agreement. Please have a seat while we discuss this. Sitting down in an armchair, I handed the lawyer a copy of the investigator's report and the photos attached to it. Before he could study them, I confidently stated, I think my case will be simple. In addition, I have provided a detailed list of all assets owned by both me and Vicky, indicating the dates and methods of their acquisition. I have also included a copy of our marriage contract, which stipulates the division of property and custody of our children. All I'm seeking is a divorce based on adultery and a fair settlement in accordance with a prenuptial agreement. I was afraid that Jasmine's situation would turn out to be more difficult. I gave the lawyer the documents I had brought for the divorce and waited impatiently for him to study them. When he finished with my papers, Jasmine handed him her package of documents, which did not contain a prenuptial agreement. The lawyer then explained to both of us the essence of the divorce process, the timing, and the cost of his services. Afterward, he moved on to discussing the desired results of Jasmine's divorce, should she decide to proceed with it. Concluding the conversation, he noted that he needed to familiarize himself with all the documents and conclusions of the investigator. If he had any further questions, he assured us he would contact us. Otherwise, he would prepare the necessary documents and proceed. He also asked if it was necessary to notify Jasmine before handing over the documents, as she had requested to be called when they were ready. After leaving the office, we returned to our business, promising to stay in touch. 2 days later, George Spaulding called me. After exchanging pleasantries, George said, "Don, I've looked through everything you provided me with, and I have to say that this is the most unusual case I've come across." I asked 2 of my colleagues to analyze it, and they share the same opinion. Despite the evidence of infidelity, it is clear as day that this woman has strong feelings for you. To be honest, it doesn't even look like a typical affair. It was more like some kind of vicious game in which intimacy was a prerequisite. Don, are you sure you want to continue with this insidious plan? I can't help but wonder why, given everything you've said about your seemingly flawless marriage. You and your spouse rarely quarreled. Your intimate life was exceptional, and you both seem to genuinely care about each other. Don, forgive me for saying this, but it seems to me that you also participated in this game. Now, you think this is your move, and the only option left is divorce. Could you talk to Vicky and forget about it? After thinking about it, I told George maybe I could forget about it if their relationship had been purely emotional, or even just pretend without physical intimacy. I might have been able to forget about it. At first, it seemed that Vicky was upset that I had ridiculed her belief that she could successfully cheat without consequences. She could not accept my statement that there are no clever liars and that it is only a matter of time before they are revealed. If she hadn't crossed the line and allowed Steve to have an intimate relationship with her, maybe I wouldn't have paid attention to her deception. But her infidelity continued for 6 years, and eventually I reached my limit. Despite the scant intimacy and lack of pleasure compared to me, it was still considered adultery, and she would have to face the consequences. George sighed and reluctantly said, "This is your life, Dawn. I just hate having to do this to you." He mentioned that he had prepared the necessary documents for the application and asked when we should notify her. Smiling, I replied, "George, she and Steve are on the East Coast this week. She's supposed to be back late Friday night. Can we notify her at work on Friday? I assume her flight will arrive around noon, so she should be at the office by 3:30. I'd like to inform her about this and give her the recording I prepared for her. It records part of her conversation with Steve about the breakup. You can listen to it, but at the end I mentioned that they lost. As I said before, scammers, sooner or later, make mistakes and get caught. On Friday morning, I gathered my team in the office before they went to their jobs. I informed them of my decision to divorce Vicky and the reasons for it. I advised them not to follow any of her instructions and not to share any additional information about my business or personal life with her. As they were leaving, Laura, my secretary, expressed sympathy, saying she was shocked by Vicky's actions. She remembered that Vicky had a strong dislike for traders and chuckled, recalling how Vicky used to make harsh remarks when she witnessed such behavior. At 4:10 p.m. on the same day, the lawyer informed me that the documents had been handed over. About 20 minutes later, the phone rang, which I had been expecting. When I saw that Vicky was calling, I hesitantly answered. "Hi, Vicky," I said. Through my tears, I heard her trembling voice. "Don, please, can we finish everything? You know how much I love you." Now I realize that I made a stupid mistake. But that night, I was furious when you so condescendingly lectured me for a remark that would have easily been overlooked by a clever crook. Don, during the first year, our meetings were focused solely on planning and proving our capabilities. I know you heard me tell Steve that I don't love him and that our intimate life leaves much to be desired. We were discussing how to end it. Please don't betray me like this. It's incredible that you found out this secret after all these years. I wonder how you managed to find out the truth. Vicky, I didn't intentionally ruin our relationship, I said. You did it, and now I have to summarize. I thought we both agreed not to cheat or have affairs. I was sure neither of us would condone such behavior. We both understood that, in the end, cheaters reap what they sow, But now I wonder how you could do this. How could you rationalize the same emotions we both share? I made the decision to show compassion to you, Vicky. I decided to tell you how I found out about your affair. Vicky, I never planned to talk about how I caught you, but now I feel like I have to. You were partly right when you said that going to Denver together was a mistake. When I was sitting in the office that Thursday before you returned, Jasmine Sloan came and asked for her services in building the terrace and landscaping the backyard. She kindly allowed me to use Steve's office, where I noticed a photo of you with him, alongside a trophy his car won at the Chevrolet Classic races in the state. That's when I found out you were one of his past girlfriends. I was close to buying into this story until I noticed in the photo that you looked young enough for this to have happened recently. Moreover, you were wearing jewelry and outfits that, in my opinion, were only a couple of years old. At first, I was inclined to dismiss my suspicions and consider the possibility that you were dating before we got together and accidentally crossed paths at an auto show. But after talking to Jasmine, I found out that both you and he were in Denver during that week. Therefore, we decided to use the services of an investigator and monitor your actions over the next month. We were closely monitoring both of you. Except for one dance at your friend's party, you didn't communicate anymore. We were already on the verge of ending the investigation, thinking that you had accidentally bumped into Steve and took a picture with him. But Jasmine and I were exchanging information about both of you, and I remembered that she mentioned Steve would be in San Antonio and you would be in Austin. This prompted us to continue monitoring both of you during that week. If we hadn't found anything, we would have been ready to give up on this idea. But we made a discovery, didn't we? I noticed some movement in the background. After that, Vicky said, "Don, you are very dear to me. I don't want to lose you. Can you find the strength to forgive me, at least this time?" I sighed and replied, "No, dear, I can't do that. Not right now. I could have forgiven you if you hadn't betrayed me, but I can't forget that you were close to him. How long have you been having an affair? But, darling, don't you understand? It wasn't exactly a romantic story. It was more of a challenge. I just needed to show that it was possible. The physical aspect, well, it was because we were away from our usual surroundings and felt very excited. It was almost like using each other to achieve physical release. We didn't have a love relationship, and I don't remember us ever expressing love for each other. It's always been a game, and the last 4 years have just been a way of having fun. Vicky, it doesn't matter. All that matters is that you did it. You planned to make a fool out of me, and you succeeded. You were supposed to meet Steve at some place and made an appointment. I wouldn't be at all surprised if it happened at a party at one of your friends' houses." Vicky sighed and replied, "Yes, Don, that's exactly what happened. While we were talking, he came up to the table and asked me to dance. At that time, the girls and I were discussing a couple we knew from work who had an unstable relationship. I jokingly commented on the idea of smart traders and that they don't exist. While we were dancing, I shared our conversation with Steve, expressing my beliefs. Before escorting me back to the table, he suggested we could break this pattern. He mentioned that he travels a lot and suggested the idea of meeting in another city to change things up. That evening, we danced a few more times and finally decided to try it. During our conversation, I found out that he is a representative of a manufacturing company, and he found out that I was conducting a compliance check. We realized that we would both be in the same area in about 3 weeks, and we agreed to meet. During our meeting, we began to outline the ideal plan for the future. We signed an agreement that we would never contact each other by personal phones and would use mobile phones to organize secret meetings. We even made fake IDs and used a new credit card with the bills sent to a mailbox near my parents' house, where I often check my mail. We thought through everything except for the details of the photographic aspect of our plan. I didn't know at all that she still belonged to him. Vicky's smile took on a sad tinge as she spoke further. I always believed that just one small mistake would lead to the traitor being discovered. She apologized. "Forgive me, my love. I guess I got too carried away with all this. I love you." A click signaled the end of the conversation, and tears suddenly welled up in my eyes. I leaned back in my chair, thinking that she hadn't said good night to me. I remember a shiver running down my spine when I realized it was already dark outside. Before the final decision on the divorce was made, both parents tried at different times to dissuade me from breaking off my relationship with Vicky. The most sincere request came from her parents, who called me on Saturday and asked if they could come to see the children. I agreed, and after spending some time with the kids, we all sat together in the shade by the pool on sun loungers. While I was watching the kids playing in the pool, Vicky's mom turned to me and confessed, "Don, we all understand that my daughter behaved stupidly when she came to our house that evening. She was in a state of despair. It took a lot of effort to get the details out of her because she was hysterical and thought she had ruined everything. In the end, we managed to calm her down, and she revealed the evidence that you had against her. I have to admit, if I had caught her father the same way she did, I would have been inclined to leave him too. But could you focus on what I'm saying instead of what I would do in such a situation? I can see how much she loves you. You can see it in the way she looks at you, talks about you, and even when she sees your picture. The problem lies in her complex of intellectual superiority. She's used to being the smartest person in the room and finds it necessary to prove that she is able to handle such a situation. Don, have you ever thought about the fact that you played a role in her decision? She told me about your disagreements about friends shortly before she decided to have an affair, so that it would not be found out. I looked at my mother-in-law and admitted, "Yes, Mona, I think I could have influenced her actions." I said that I could have forgiven her if she had just met him and not entered into a physical relationship. But unfortunately, this was not the case. Remember how we both confessed our predilection for cheating before tying the knot? She insisted so much on including the fidelity clause in the prenuptial agreement. But now she has done something that contradicts it. Despite the pain it caused her, she couldn't just forget about it. The divorce was finalized, and she found solace in the fact that we had a prenuptial agreement. They had investments and shared ownership of the house, and her business, which was registered in her name, was considered her gift. Vicky didn't get any share of it. I allowed Vicky to withdraw the value of her share of the house from the investment account, making me the sole owner. Despite this, I was always cordial with Vicky when our paths crossed and never prevented her from visiting the children. I still wanted to hug her when we met, but I knew that the trust between us was irreparably damaged. One day, when I was taking the kids to dinner, Jasmine came into the building. She hesitated on the threshold, looking uncertain. When the waitress came over, she asked about the number of guests. Jasmine held up one finger, prompting me to quickly intervene before they reached her table. "Jasmine, I'm glad to see you," I greeted her. "I noticed you told Patty that you were alone. If you want, the children and I can join you at the same table." Jasmine froze for a moment and then smiled. I felt relieved, and the room suddenly became much brighter. She came up to me, gave me a quick hug, and kissed me on the cheek. "Thank you," she said. "I think I'll like it here. I've been feeling very lonely lately." As soon as Jasmine settled down at the table, I introduced her to my children. Before she could look at the menu, my father was next to us, teasing, "Dawn, do you have secrets from me? Who is this beautiful lady?" I giggled, and Jasmine smiled. I turned to my father and answered, "Dad, this is Jasmine Sloan." She introduced herself as Danito Horton's daughter. They often visited this place when she was a child. My father recognized her, noting the strong resemblance to her mother. He asked about her parents, noting that he hadn't seen them for many years. Jasmine replied that she thought they were both doing well and mentioned that she sometimes talks to her father on the phone. After the divorce, he moved to Kansas City, and she visits her mom several times a month. She lives north of the city. I hope you enjoy the evening and visit us more often since you know where we are. After Jasmine placed her order, I asked how she was feeling. "I regret that I don't call more often," I admitted. "Summer is the busiest time of the year. I often use that as an excuse, but I was able to find the time now. I apologize for not contacting you sooner." Jasmine calmed me down, saying, "Don't be silly. I know you're busy, and I haven't called you either. Actually, I'm here today to celebrate. Steve finally gave up, and my divorce was finalized today. We had to sell the house and split everything equally. He resisted paying child support, but eventually agreed to the divorce. Since he discouraged me from working, I managed to prevail. For now, I'm living in a small, run-down apartment, but as soon as I find a job, I'll get a better place. After dinner, the children became restless. Jasmine and I chatted and decided to order another bottle of wine. Eventually, I told Jasmine that I had better leave before the noisy kids got us kicked out. It was very nice to meet you. Maybe we can do this again sometime soon, I suggested. Jasmine smiled and agreed. I'd be happy to, she said. I have the funds to pay for this, she added confidently, and went to the waitress to ask for the bill. Smiling, the waitress informed her that both bills had already been paid. Grinning, Jasmine muttered, "That treacherous old man. He always knows how to push my buttons." Suspecting my father was trying to play matchmaker, she added a generous tip to the table and stood up. Turning to the children, she said, "Let's go say good night to your grandparents and head home." Helping Jasmine up from her chair, I held out my hand. "May I escort you to the carriage, my lady?" I asked. Jasmine grinned, took my hand, and replied, "Of course, my dear sir." While we were waiting for the children to join us, I turned to Jasmine and confessed, "I must admit, I wish this evening would never end. Before you came, I was looking forward to coming home and relaxing by the pool. All I imagined was a quiet evening alone with the kids." Jasmine met my gaze and quietly agreed. "I feel the same way. We don't have a pool in our apartment, and I don't have kids." "It's still early," I said. "Would you like to visit me again after I put these two to bed?" Jasmine smiled and nodded. She whispered, "Yes, I'd really like that." After the children fell asleep, I filled a cooler with wine, beer, soft drinks, and ice and set it between the sun loungers by the pool. I handed Jasmine a Pepsi and leaned back in my chair, looking at the pool shimmering in the dim light. Sighing, I turned to Jasmine and hesitantly said, "You know, I think your mom played a role in my divorce." Instantly regretting my words, I apologized. "I'm sorry, Yasmin. That was inappropriate of me. I was just thinking." Jasmine sat with her eyes wide open, staring at me in horror. I noticed a tiny tear rolling down her cheek. I struggled out of my chair, walked over to hers, and sat on the edge. Gently wiping away the tear, I confessed, "I have to admit, I acted stupidly. I was only 16 and had just started working at a restaurant. One evening, your mom came in with a mysterious man. They had dinner together, then went to the bar for a drink and dance. I used to think your mom was the most beautiful woman in the world, until I met you. I couldn't help but stare at her, and my dad caught me. He overheard me saying that I'd tell my friends about what I'd seen when school started on Monday. I distinctly remember the swearing and the lecture I got that evening in his office. That experience shaped my views on marital fidelity. Later, when Vicky joined our team, she received a similar lecture. We often had long conversations about our impressions and observations in the restaurant. I thought my dad and I had the same views, but perhaps I was too insistent on loyalty. Meeting your mom that evening was the catalyst for the path I chose in this whole situation. I apologize. To answer your possible question, no, none of my family or the staff betrayed your mom. I don't know who did, but it took almost a year after that incident before your parents separated. As far as I know, that was the only time she and her male friend dined at the restaurant." Jasmine looked at me and commented, maybe there was something positive in the situation, or maybe not, depending on the point of view. She continued, saying her mother eventually married the man, and they stayed together until his tragic death in a car accident a few years ago. "I don't know the details," she admitted. "I suspect she cheated on him too. They say a cheater never changes their ways." When Jasmine stopped crying, we resumed the conversation, moving on to lighter topics. I found out she has a degree in accounting and worked in the field for a while. I chuckled as I recalled my mother's complaints about accounting duties at the restaurant and managing the waiters. Later, I decided to hire a babysitter for Suzanne. On Wednesday evening, I had just returned home from work and barely had time to take a sip of water when there was a knock on the door. When I opened it, I was surprised to see Jasmine. She immediately rushed to me, hugged me tightly, and tried to kiss me. Through her tears, she said, "Thank you. Oh, thank you." After receiving a job offer from your parents, I passed an interview and a test, after which I was hired. My first day of work is tomorrow, and I was surprised by the generous salary they offered me. When she started crying, I comforted her by hugging her tightly. Over time, Jasmine and I developed a strong bond. I often took the children with me to dinner, planning my visits so the accountant could join us. Over the next few months, our relationship continued to grow closer. Jasmine was invited to the Pattersons' Christmas dinner, and later we both helped prepare the New Year's Eve party at the bar. Despite my father and brothers jokingly complaining that we were of no use because we were constantly hugging and kissing instead of working, we had become a well-established couple. Every invitation that one of us received automatically included the other. And now Valentine's Day had arrived. It was another busy day at the restaurant and bar, and Jasmine and I found ourselves working late. After the last customers left, I went into the restaurant and called Jasmine, asking her to come to the bar for a minute. The band was on a break, and I needed her help to get on stage. Smiling, Jasmine agreed, noting she could use a break from the hustle and bustle. Once on stage, I asked her to hold the microphone stand while I got down on one knee. Pulling on the bass, I loudly called for the lights. Jasmine was looking around for the light source when a spotlight suddenly shone on both of us. I called her name, my voice echoing around the room. She looked down and saw that I was holding a small black square object, which she initially mistook for part of the microphone stand. The brightness of the light made it hard for her to see clearly, but as she reached for the proffered object, I spoke again. "Jasmine," I said, "I'm down here humbly asking for your hand. You've brought so much joy into my life, and I'm only truly happy when I'm with you." When Jasmine's fingers finally touched the box, she realized what I was saying. Covering the box with her hands, she asked, "What did you say?" With a small smile, I watched her open the box and discover the beautiful ring inside. Her mouth fell open in disbelief, and she gasped, covering her mouth with her hand. With a sense of awe, she slowly took the ring out of its case and looked at me before sliding it onto her ring finger. Tears welled up in her eyes. "Yes," she whispered, "I love you with all my heart. I've been dreaming for months that you'd love me too." "I do," I whispered back. Cheers erupted from the hall as the band and staff clapped. Taking a deep breath, Jasmine walked out of the hall and saw my entire family gathered, celebrating our love. My brother picked her up and hugged her before passing her to the rest of the family, who embraced her warmly. Jasmine set our wedding date for June. Over the following months, she quietly moved her belongings from her small apartment to our shared house. At the post-wedding reception, Jasmine and I happily opened gifts from loved ones. At the bottom of the stack, there was a single yellowed envelope containing a heart-shaped Valentine's card. It looked as old as the envelope itself. The signature had been erased, leaving a mystery as to its origins. The card read, "I got this from the man I loved on our first Valentine's Day and have treasured it ever since. Now, it feels right to give it to you. This can be seen as a symbolic transfer of his heart from me to you. I hope that the love and care you feel for each other will fill your lives forever. May you always cherish one another, avoid causing heartache, and never let pride come between you. Congratulations to both of you. I wish you a lifetime of love and joy. With love, Victoria." Over time, Victoria saw less and less of our children, and they also distanced themselves from her. 3 months after my wedding to Jasmine, Victoria left town. 3 years later, she was brought back to her parents' house in a coffin. Victoria had been in a terrible car accident. She never experienced the happiness we once shared as a family.